So I'm going to start with you, Mr. Mehmet. From your perspective, from all that we've heard, first let me quickly look together at the poll results. So 50% of the attendees think that it's because of ineffective governance and mismanagement of resources that we are where we are today. 24% think it's lack of public awareness, and 26% think of it as an exclusion and lack of citizen engagement. So from your own perspective, Dr. Mehmet, what do you think? What has gone wrong in the last years, and what did we do right so that we reached where we are today?
It's good to be here. Salam to everyone. Greetings. It's an amazing organization. Therefore, we need to get this awareness. Although the results are interesting, but it seems that we are shifting the blame to the governance. But just an example to refer to what is wrong. Yesterday, I had a master class, and after everyone left, I looked at the class, and I saw a lot of unfinished bottles of water, and no one has taken them with them, just left it there. So total waste. So while it is very easy to shift the blame to the governance, global governance, the country governance, whatever it is, I think it is important that we need to look at our behavioral norms. It starts from our behavior, and we have to look into that. Of course, global governance, including the governance in each country, has responsibilities and has to deliver. But at the same time, as individuals, as citizens, we have to look into. Each time when I go to conferences, I check the non-empty bottles on the conference tables. And that's a shame, to be honest. And let's make a difference in this conference, and let's finish, or at least take the water with you and just water the plants at least. So that's important that we have to look into. And therefore, I'm a political economist, and it is important for me to look at the system analysis, look at the relationship between institutions, individuals, and the agencies. But at the same time, we should not forget it is the behavioral norms that we have to look into. And when it comes to behavioral norms, unfortunately, it seems that we have all become part and parcel of this terrible consumption society that has been created by neoliberalism. And we say that we are challenging that, like in this program as well. But when it comes to behavior, such as in the conference tables, you see all those bottles of waters lying around. The cost of that, the plastic as well as the water. And drought is around even in UK where I come from. So these are important factors. So what we have done that didn't work? Of course, the whole accessibility has become an important issue in the region, Sharq region, larger Middle East region, but globally as well. The accessibility to resources, unfortunately, we have all these barriers created. Political economy, of course, politics is responsible, the governance, the failure in the governance system, not giving the accessibility to people to have the resources that are created for them. So that remains an important factor that your generation, because my generation unfortunately failed, but at least this generation, the new leadership, has to tackle the accessibility issue, such as each country, including in the Sharq region, Sharq region, submitted to neoliberal realities, so-called realities, such as water. Water have become a commodity. Water cannot be a commodity. Water is a good. Everyone needs it and cannot be bought or sold with a price. So these are the challenges that your generation have to make. In other words, corporations or humans and environment. So that choice, we have to respond to the corporations that human lives, the well-being of all the stakeholders, humans, environment, land, has to be there. And therefore, the healing process in the last 40 years in particular, with under neoliberalism, the results have been catastrophic. The environment is taking a revenge. And all these catastrophes and human tragedies with all this refugee crisis we have around us, we have to ask the main question. Yes, we have to support the refugees. We have to be environmental protectionists. We have to look after the land and other people. But the question that we have to ask as well, why we have environmental problem and hence solution, why we have refugees and hence the solutions that we have to produce. Otherwise, just solidarity is important, essential. And in particular, in the Islamic tradition, solidarity is the essential part of the sharing economy. But the main questions that we have to go ask as well. And therefore, responding these 40 years of heavy neoliberalism, the healing process have to start. And that healing process will start with the questions that we have to raise and bringing the necessary answers in immediately responding by changing our behavioral norms. Rather than submitting this heavy neoliberal consumption society and taking the responsibility that we have everything around it. The rescuing process, rescuing human, rescuing climate, rescuing environment has to take place so that we can live in solidarity by providing the necessary accessibility and the opportunity space for everything. Opportunity space for humans to have well-being, opportunity space for environment, opportunity space for climate to renew itself, to get back. I mean, with the COVID, we had that amazing opportunity for the rescuing process, but immediately after the COVID, the same behavioral norms with same heavy consumption patterns, implications on environment, human as well as the land. I think we have to, sorry for emphasizing a lot on the behavioral norm, but that's an essential part that we have to start and then go to the governance as well as the global governance. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Is my mic working? Yes. Thank you, Mr. Mehmet. And this was a great segue to go to. I'm not gonna keep saying alqab. I'm just gonna drop the titles and call you by your names. So it's a great segue to go to Karim and ask you about climate. You know, climate change is one of the most pressing causes now for the lack of sustainability that we are living and the lack of sustainable development in the world today. Yet we feel like it's a topic that is very far from the day-to-day discussions in our region. What are we doing wrong? Why have we failed to put climate change on top priorities in our societies?
Thank you for the great question. So I'll segue through Professor Mahmoud Asutai's comments first. I would say that the thing that we got wrong not to get sustainable development right is essentially a market failure. I would argue that the capitalist system that we have developed is one where the things that we share globally, we know as the global commons, like the oceans, the air that we all breathe and share, the ecosystems and the forests are not. If we damage those, if corporations damage those, if countries damage those, no one is paying for that. They call it externalities. It's free. It's something that we can damage with no consequence. So essentially the system, the economic system that we've developed for this world is designed in a way where the environment loses out. So if there's one great injustice in the world, it is that environmental injustice. Of course, there's a social injustice that we also might as well get fixed while we're at it, but climate is a component of this injustice. And when we say we want to turn towards sustainable development, what we are saying is we're trying to fix this injustice to the environment, the fact that we're taking it for granted and then abusing it as if it has no cost to us, and also fix the social injustice as well in the same process. And climate specifically is something that has been very pressing, and the reason it's pressing is there is a risk that it might run away from us and we might lose all control over it and being unable to fix it even if we wanted to, even if we tried. And in the case of climate change, I would argue that the fundamental problem we had is that we could not force countries to do things. We could not set rules for countries to do things. Even the Paris Agreement that we currently have only would go as far as individual countries are willing to go. So a country would say, we were willing to reduce our carbon emissions by 15% if we get enough money for it, or 5%, or 2%. It's up to them. Individual countries do it's up to what they see fit. And this is how the system is currently designed under the Paris Agreement. And the good news is, if youth and people in those countries ask for more ambitious climate action, if they push for their own countries to prioritize climate action, prioritize more sustainable development models than the current models in their own countries, then we might have the chance of going in a better direction that is more climate friendly.
That's perfect, Karim. Thank you so much. I'm going to come back to you because you said some things that I think it's important today to leave people also with some recommendations. So I'll leave that to the second question. Mr. Adil, has Muslim societies done everything wrong or did we do some good things?
Well, I mean, in
Yani,
trying...
let's leave the public today with some, also some positivity. What did we do right, at least, towards the Sustainable Development Goals?
Well, I mean, I think Muslim societies in general have made great strides, particularly when it comes to the Middle East, in terms of expanding access to basic education, access to basic health services. If you are somebody working on Africa, Latin America, even South Asia, you'll find that a lot of countries in the Sharq region have achieved the basic gains in human development in terms of access to education and health. Where they have failed is in terms of creating a new development model that serves everyone and that gives agency to ordinary people. I think as someone who studies political economy, I would like to view these problems, how do we create a just and inclusive world in terms of power and hegemony, right? Because the powerful want to control resources. They want to distribute resources in ways that serves their own objective function. And here I'm reminded of the great Arab journalist and scholar, intellectual, Abdul Rahman al-Kawakibi. His book, The Nature of Tyranny and the Nature of Oppression in the Arab world, he talks a great deal about, what is the problem of Arab development. And he situates it in tyranny. But he was one of those scholars who actually talked about tyranny not just in political terms, that there's repression of people. He talked about tyranny in economic terms, how the powerful try and control resources, try and fragment markets, control and distribute resources in ways that furthers their rule. And this is very much manifested in the Arab development model, because we have a development model in the Arab societies where the state, according to Tariq Yusuf, for example, is very much interventionist. It intervenes in the market. You have a circle of businessmen who survive through their proximity to the power. And then it distributes resources to people in ways that could be unsustainable. A lot of the fuel subsidies, food subsidies are quite unsustainable, but they are needed for the ruler because they are part of an authoritarian social contract. They're part of authoritarian social contract where, a lot of these welfare instruments like food subsidies, fuel subsidies, housing loans, they're distributed in return for acquiescence for the regime. And I think the key question that the Arab world faces today, how do we think about a new development model? A new development model that is just and inclusive. But when we talk about justice, justice in not ordinary lay terms, but justice in authentic terms, for example, in the ways in which Ibn Khaldun thought about justice. He inspires me because he's one of the few philosophers who actually talked about economic justice, also from the perspective of the uneven economic landscape. He talked about how businessmen, a set of businessmen who are too close to the royal circle, can unlevel the playing field for other smaller businesses who do not enjoy the same proximity to the powerful. And that is very much the reality of the Arab world today.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to go last but not least to Mr. Diego. And I want to ask you, how did social innovation help us as a tool to overcome some of these challenges that we are facing for a more just world?
Yes, thank you. So I will try to build on what my colleague said. From NESI, from the New Economy Social Innovation Forum, we think that we need to create a new vision. We need to create systemic change. And systemic change means transforming the system, the economic system that you were talking before. So how to create a new narrative? This morning we were talking about new narratives. How to create a common vision for all the regions of the planet, because we share the problems, climate change, growing inequalities. So we need to understand how the current system works and then create the vision of how we would like to dream on a new system. So the capitalist system is quite simple and it works. The goal of the system is to maximize capital. That's the reason it's called capitalism. It's the worship of capital. And the indicators of the system are aligned with the goal. So if you are a country, you measure the success in terms of the GDP, not of the quality of life of your people. If you are a business, you measure your success according to the balance sheet, how much money you get, how much profit. Even if you are an individual, you measure the success of the quality of your clothes, the number of properties you have, houses, cars. So that is the current system, and it's very well done to work in that way. So we need to imagine something different, because that system also produces climate change, inequalities, and which are the values of that system? Greed, selfishness, envy, even violence to compete for the resources. So what's the alternative? What's the new system we need to build? The goal should be an economy that serves people and the planet. That should be the goal, the common good. That is the only reason that human beings invented the economy, to exchange products and services, to help us and to respect the nature. So what about the indicators? So we need to build new indicators about quality of life, about the quality of the environment. Even we have examples in Bhutan, in the country, they create, instead of the gross domestic product, the gross happiness product. They measure the happiness of the people. If you are a business, you have to measure the impact on your stakeholders in the society, in the environment. Even if you are an individual, you have to measure how you relate with your community, with the environment. You need to take your plastic bottle when you finish the session, as we said before. And which are the values of an economic system where the goal is to serve people and planet? The values I've been listening these 2 days in this conference. Respect, empathy. This morning we were talking about empathy. Love, to love even your enemy. That are the values that we need, the human values. So we cannot try to stop climate change inequalities with an economic system that only brings greed and envy. We need to change the economy to change the world.
Thank you very much, and I agree with you. Values is a central element, because it is the measure stick with which we measure, am I doing things right or wrong? Does it align with my values or not? But other than the theoretical paradigm of like the values we need to follow, I want to leave the youth today in this room with some practical tools that they can do in their day-to-day to change the state of our countries into a better one. So I want each and every one of you to really brainstorm now in the second round of questions and to give us some practical solutions. We know that we need to do revolutions and the governance systems need to change, and all of that. We need to fight the corporations for climate change. All of the big things, we will be doing them. But what about the day-to-day things? What about the youth in this room? What can they do today, tomorrow, after tomorrow, so that they can change our region into a more just and sustainable one? Anyone would like to start? Karim, go ahead.
I would say they need to organize. Those who've attended the master class yesterday would have remembered that message. In order for the youth to have an impact, if they want climate action, if they want to change the future of their region in terms of the climate side, they need to demand it. And in order to demand it, they first have to understand what's going on, understand where the weaknesses of the current system is and how they could contribute to it and which angle can they support, and then they need to organize. They can work alone, they could make a lot of noise and demand things on their own, but they will be a lot more heard if they become an entity, a civil society organization, a group that demands that the governments, their local authorities, the governorates in which they reside, or even beyond, that does take climate action at local scale or at national scale. And if they want real impact, those civil society organizations could create networks that then go on to speak on behalf of a much larger number of people and demand that national governments do take action. This is the most impactful way in which the youth can demand that governments take further action. It all starts with understanding the climate fundamentals. What is it that we are asking for? What is climate change? What is climate action? How do we demand governments to do better on all of these things that will, honestly, change the youth's future far more than they will change ours?
What about a daily habit? Give us a tip, one daily habit that we can...
So personal consumption is excessive in many parts of the world. I can't make judgment about everyone from every country because our footprint, our environmental footprint varies widely between countries. But if you think that you're consuming things that are unnecessary to you, remember that it's not just about the money that you pay for it, it's mostly about the footprint of making this. And the more you buy it, the more they will make more of it. And that will have an environmental impact on many, many things. So reducing consumption to levels that are within what you need, I think that would be a good start. If you're into habits like walking and cycling rather than driving, or taking public transportation rather than driving, if you're into saving energy, perhaps only using electricity when you need it, I think that would be a good start. Cut out all the slack, all the unnecessary consumption. We're not asking you to not live or anything, or to go live in a cave. We're just saying only live within what you think is reasonable and is required of you to do to perform your daily tasks. If you're into recycling and looking after the material resources, everything that we buy and then throw away is very linear. They don't take it back. So if we at least help them a little bit by separating the waste so that potentially they could use it again, we turn our economy and our use of materials from a linear path into a circular path that the resources, our finite resources, could keep going back in cycles. So that's 3 advice in one go.
That's perfect, thank you. And I think everyone in this room with an Arab dad knows that we need to turn off the light when they leave the room.
Yes.
So that's something we all learned. Okay, I will go to you, Mr. Mehmet. What advice do you give us today? What are the practical things we can do to change the world from where we stand?
I think, as I mentioned, it's a time for hope and healing in the face of these catastrophes that we have in front of us. The hope, as I can see here, a new historical block. Connectivity, solidarity, establishing a historical bloc to create a counter-hegemony, saying that that's enough. And therefore, as the new generation, you want to take the power into your hand. And in saying that, the critical thinking and deconstructing and the disruption is an important part of the process. I'm not talking about revolutions, but first, heart and the mind has to change in order to bring the actions in everydayness. And we have to do that. And that historical bloc, creating a counter-hegemony with the heart and mind changed in relation to stakeholders, the human environment, land, climate, and etc., is an essential part. That the discourse have to be established. And such as a large crowd we have here, amazing opportunity space for us. For instance, hopefully you guys come together to produce a declaration among yourself in relation to this forum, saying that as Sharq Forum participants, we are for, and suggest that you are here to take up the power and saying that you are not going to be convinced with the greenwashing that is going around. SDGs sounds, Sustainable Development Goals sounds amazing. But as long as it doesn't go to the initial equation, still it will remain within the hegemony of capital and capitalism. So we have to break that, we have to deconstruct that, we have to disrupt, and therefore come up with the idea, say that, look, in the initial equation, my presence, environmental presence, climate presence, land presence have to be there. So we have to bring that intellectual conviction in our lives and the mind. And as a result of that, the healing process, the circular economy, how much we can do. As I mentioned, starting just with this conference, rather than leaving your bottles there without unfinished, you have to take it. Most of us, coming from that Islamic tradition, that even when you get your ablution, you have to respect the water. The resources created for everyone to have access. The circular economy, we have to reduce also the demand for the materiality. In other words, the consumption pattern we have, unfortunately, under the influence of social media. Social media, when we are using here, is amazing, but at the same time is a terrible tool of capitalism, forcing each one of us to increase our consumption. You want to have coffee in a particular coffee place because you want to put on Instagram. The cost of that to environment, to larger environment beyond you, is a huge cost. Therefore, this compelling feeling that we have to be part of that. We have to break that. Your generation, yes, social media is amazing, but you guys have to respond to that by suggesting the materiality, reducing the demand for material and reducing quality. And therefore, rather than thinking that this growth that we have, it will continue. No, it's not continuing. And therefore, we have to reduce our consumption. We have to challenge the production methods which does not consider the impact that we are creating for others. And therefore, again, while we create this counter-hegemony, through the solidarity we can create, at the same time, we go to the behavioral norms. Okay, we should be convinced in ourselves to be able to buy our clothes from the charity shops as well. The impact on the environment, on the land, on other humans is so huge that this fashion industry, for instance, creating for us. And therefore, the awareness and the behavioral norms as part of the larger counter-hegemony is very much important so that the healing process can start from a point. And let's create this solidarity. Let's work together in our hearts and minds to generate this new discourse, this new behavior, this new political economy. But question the initial equation. SDG is fantastic, but it is not delivering because it is still based on capital hegemony. We want it to be the hegemony of people, hegemony of land, hegemony of climate. Thank you.
So, this is great. I will try not to take a picture of my coffee every day, because I do that. I'm guilty. Mr. Diego. Okay, I will start, sorry, with Mr. Adi. Go ahead.
Thank you. Great question. I think one of the biggest powers that we have as individuals is the power to dream. And when we dream, it really pushes us to aspire for more, to act more. And I think when we think about dreams, the real dreams are those that are beyond us. For which we have to be selfless, we have to serve others, right? And that power of dreams really comes from independence of thought. There is no independence of action in this world without independence of thought. There's a great teacher of mine who used to say, the great task of an intellectual is to first free himself and then to free others. Because each one of us is a prisoner of our own mind. Right? And so, in a way, our mindset determines what we are able to achieve. For the Sharq region, on which I think day and night about Arab political economy, Muslim political economy, the problems of the developing world, one thing that has always come across is the way in which young people are unhappy with the state of the world, and that is very much reflected in the answers. Something about governance, something about bad governance. But we don't know where we want to go. And there I find a real gap in terms of a discourse on Arab development, a discourse that is led by people from the region. The university that I teach, the Middle East Center at the University of Oxford, I teach a course on Arab political economy, and I find there are very few Arab students. There are hardly any Arab scholars who can really talk about the region's problems from their own experiences, from their own lens. And here we see the poverty of discourse, because in a way, back in the day in the 1950s and 60s, even up till the 70s, there was an aspiration about Arab nationalism, right? There was socialist thought, there was Muslim thought, there are different kinds of ideas about what it means to have, a regional economic order. It gave way to market-oriented crony capitalist structures. But what we are left with are no ideas for where we want to go further. In my own humble opinion, if we want to get rid of our present state and move into a new, more productive, just, inclusive future, you need to have a regional development vision. Today, we are faced with a clash of connectivities, right? There's a vision of connectivity that China aspires to build. There's a vision of connectivity that the Western order wants to build. The Middle East is totally absent in that debate. What kind of a connected region we want? A lot of the scholars and international organizations have given up on the idea of Arab, Middle Eastern regional economic integration. But in some of my works, I continue to come back to that question, that unless we think about the Arab development question from a regional lens, we cannot solve many of the big problems. If you look at Jordan today, many of its economic problems are interconnected with what happens with the neighbors. Same goes for Syria. Same goes for Lebanon. We were talking earlier in the day about problems in Tunisia. Tunisia's political transition failed not because of failure of politics. You know, there were good reasons to create political consensus. It failed because of lack of economic reform. And Tunisia is a small enough country to really solve its economic problems just by looking at its own resources. Tunisia's economic challenges are intertwined with what happens in Libya, what happens in Algeria, what happens in Morocco. So I think there is a need for a new discourse on Arab development, and that requires you to read more, to engage with the literatures that have been produced in the Arab world. You need to read about how Africa thinks about its underdevelopment, how Latin America thinks about its underdevelopment, how Europe developed over the period of time. And it's through that engagement, through independence of thought, because we are in a world where how we think and what we think is very much shaped by the outside structures. So the idea of istiqlal al-fikri or hurriyat al-fikr, independence of thought, is extremely important. When I study the Arab economies, it's very easy for me to consult for think tanks, to work for big development agencies. And it's always clear for me that yes, I need to engage with everyone, but I must maintain my independence because it's very easy to be misused. And there is a real politics of knowledge where all of you need to be aware of and really engage with scholarship.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Last but definitely not least, we want some practical tools. We want to go out of this room thinking, now I know what I want to do.
I go for 3 levels of tools to catalyze systemic change. The first one is the personal level, and let me be a little bit provocative. A question for the public. Who is wearing a second-hand garment right now? Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7 people in around 600, 700, so 1%. So if we want to apply circular economy, we need to buy second-hand, we need to repair the things that we use, the clothes, the furniture, whatever. So as Gandhi said, be the change you want to see in the world, be the economy you want to see in the world. Buy local, buy less. Next time you go to a shop, ask yourself, do I really need this or not? Or can I get second-hand instead of a new garment? So that is the first level, the personal level. The second level is the professional level. If you are working or trying to start to work in a company, try to identify that organization, company, business, or NGO, or government, when you can bring your values. Try to make an impact with your profession, not just making money. You need money. We need money, of course. Money for a company is like air for the human beings. I need air. But my goal in my life is not breathing. I don't wake up every morning saying, I'm going to breathe a lot. I'm going to breathe many times. No, that is not my goal. I need it. So money, we need money to buy things, but it's not the goal of your life. So try to develop your profession, creating a positive impact, a social and environmental positive impact. And the third level is politics. Not only the personal level, not only the business or professional level, you need to engage with politics. Politics is so important. Politics is so important that it shouldn't be only for politicians. We need to be political activists. Buying second-hand is a political act. So these kind of things we need to do. So we need young people in politics because, of course, the current politicians in different countries, they are not doing the right things. Even the first question about governance and governments, you disagree with what is going on. So hopefully you are the next one to be there. So be brave enough to try to be a politician, or at least to be a political activist, and be an example for the world. But be an example with your personal life, with your professional life, and also with your political activism.
That's great advice, especially that I know a lot of the youth lost faith in politics because of what happened in the last 10 years. But I agree with you that we should still engage in politics, and we should do all of these tracks in parallel to be able to change something. So thank you so much, all of you, for your very insightful contribution. Some of you guys have already sent Q&A through the app. We're going to choose 2 questions from the app and ask them to our dear panelists. Then we will take some questions from people here as well. I will start with the first one. How to manifest the Ibn Khaldun system on economic justice in practical sense in the MENA region, whereas the economic power of this region is low and dependent to other string countries being to begin with. Sorry. So how can we apply the Ibn Khaldun system on economic justice in our region, although we are economically not independent? The second question I'm going to take is, if a new narrative is needed to make people aware of the danger of climate change, what are the important aspects of this narrative? So how would that new narrative on climate change be? And the third question, which I will translate, is how can we, or what are the steps that we need to plant for the community awareness for better climate friendly, I'm not a translator, but I mean, for better climate friendly actions around us. ما هي الخطوات لزرع الوعي الجماعي في التعامل بسلوكيات سليمة للبيئة? So I'm going to take 2 of you for this round of questions, and then I'll take 2 others for the round from the public. Who would like to respond? Go ahead, please, Adam.
Yes. So when we think of Ibn Khaldun's idea of economic justice, where economic power is not just controlled by a tiny elite, but is available to most, is a very, very difficult question. In Europe, countries were dealing with the same question. In Africa today, there are a lot of countries where there's a similar concentration of economic power. I think you need a new model of economic solidarity where there's an emergence of small and medium enterprises that can challenge the power of the big guys. And we are sitting in Turkey. Turkey's political economy is really fascinating. It provides an excellent laboratory for that. Because before Turgut Özal's reforms in 1980s, they were the big guys, the big guns in industry in Ankara, in Istanbul, in Izmir. And over the time, we find that economic power shifted to new patterns of trade, new firms from Anatolia, which are now known as the Anatolian Tigers. They changed the economic landscape. The economic power shifted from big connected actors to small and medium enterprises. But this happened because a lot of these small and medium enterprises were inserted in global circuits of trade. The problem in the Arab world is that a lot of these countries, a lot of these economic orders are sustained by 2 forces, oil and conflict. Because a lot of the countries that are still resource poor, think about Egypt, they can survive without economic reform because they get cheap cash from the Gulf to survive. They get geopolitical rents. So ultimately, we need to have a regionally integrated merchant class. You cannot have a new political economy of the Middle East without creating a regionally integrated merchant class. That is a very difficult prospect to achieve, but at least at the level of discourse, we need that.
Thank you very much. Anyone else would like to comment?
I'll go. There's a reference to Ibn Khaldun's justice, so that implies that there's a relevance to understand the Islamic economic thought as well. Of course, Ibn Khaldunian economic justice, by referring to the distribution of resources in the society, is important. But I think where we are now, the accessibility of resources is an essential issue. And therefore, rather than restricting ourselves with the Ibn Khaldunian understanding of justice, we have to go beyond. Perhaps the ontological sources are more important, therefore, for us. And those of you familiar in the Quran, justice goes together with ihsan, the beneficence. And therefore, if justice does not deliver enough so that we have everyone in a certain level, the ihsan, the beneficence goes into. What is that? Is the initial equation. So how we can correct the mechanism in the initial equation, that the initial equation, we have all the stakeholders together. So you have the human, you have the society, you have the land, you have the climate, and others all together considered. And that's the Islam's suggestion of the justice and ihsan together, so that the first equation, we can redefine the first equation to describe a new ontological response and the discourse to the problems that we have around us. In other words, accessibility. Water cannot be a commodity. Water should not be sold with a profit. And your generation has to demand that. And therefore, that can happen with proper application of the justice, with the ihsan, with the beneficent system, so that the initial equation can provide accessibilities to everyone. So that's important. In terms of the climate change, again, the alternative discourses. Yes, a sustainable development discourse suggests a new morality, global morality emerge. But that global morality, again, does not go to the heart of the problem, that it is capitalist dominated. It's a capital dominated. And therefore, we have to ask that question, to go back to initial equation, a new negotiation, a new social contract, so that all the stakeholders can be considered. It may sound very utopian, but you guys are very young. You have to have utopias so that the realities can be constructed. Without the utopians, realities cannot be constructed. And therefore, work for it, ask for it, and challenge. Thank you.
That's perfect. That is perfect. I'm going to take two quick questions from the audience. So the question is about water, and it's addressed at you yourself. So she's basically asking, since you keep on repeating water is an important resource, and knowing that a lot of the countries, for example, Somalia, gave it as an example, has a river and a sea surrounding it and has a lot of water resources, why do big countries and big international organizations don't put in their money to save this amazing resource, this huge resource that we have in our community, which is water? But ahead of your response, I'm going to take another question, and then I'm going to give each of you a minute to close. I'm going to start from you, and then...
Water is a good. It's not a commodity. However, corporations, international big companies, they are corporations. They are after commodifying the water. And therefore, even if they come, you won't be able to have access to those waters, because that will be in a bottle you have to pay, and if you don't have it, you cannot, despite the fact that it is just running through your village. And therefore, such as resources, such as water, should not be commodified, should not be left to corporations, and it has to be organized within the civil society or the public sector without profit-making system. And we have to respond to the commodification of the water, such as here. And therefore, I want you guys to join me asking from the organization, Sharq events should distribute reusable bottles and the water stations, so that we should not further commodify water as it is. And therefore, the accessibility is limited because it is commodified. Therefore, in the Islamic tradition, you have the waqf system, the endowments. We have to bring endowments to look after the water so that accessibility should be provided. In addition, in the MENA region, there's enormous dam projects, which is accumulating the water and preventing other people to have access. And as part of our demonstrations within the political process, we should challenge the creation of those excessive dam projects, which are not bringing long-term solutions as well, so that the accessibility to water to everyone can be possible. After all, God created water for everyone to have access, as well as other resources. We have to take that challenge up. Thank you.
Thank you. I think you've covered most of it. I'll be very brief. On top of this, our water resources are going to dwindle, especially in this region. We're going to get less rain where it actually does rain, and we're going to get all the rain at once. So it will be longer periods of drought, and when it does rain, it will rain all in one go. So we have to learn to adapt with this, with dams or without dams. We have to find ways in which we protect that precious resource. Certainly a common good that we have to protect for all of us, because we need it for just about everything, and the region is scarce in water and biocapacity. So absolutely all of that plus adaptation to climate change impacts.
I'll give a slightly different response to this because I'm less of an expert than my colleagues here. But I think when it comes to water conservation or water or natural resources, the debate about climate change might be new in the world, but when it comes to the Arab countries, there's been a lot of water scarcity throughout history. And there are hugely important indigenous approaches to saving water, to saving commons. If you read the books of fiqh, in fiqh, you find lots and lots of discussions about how do you manage commons. If you read the works of the Sufis, the Sanusis, the Tijaniya, whole range of Sufi orders in North Africa, Sufis were absolutely central in thinking about how is water going to be accessed, how it is going to be saved. And I think the same indigenous approach is required for human development, because through the human development approach, we learned that GDP is not enough. You need to think about human empowerment, human agency. And it's in the same way that Abdul Rahman al-Kawakabi, when he talks about tyranny, he talks about freedom. He says, God has created us free. Any economic, political structure that controls us, that usurps our freedom, is a blasphemy of God. It's one of the most beautiful statements I find in that. So I think there's a lot that we can really recover from our own tradition, including the Quran, which says, on usury, there's this whole discussion about riba. Why is it that riba is fighting God? It is fighting God because God has given us freedom. And any economic structure that usurps that freedom is a fight against God.
So regarding water, only to invite everyone to read The Tragedy of the Commons of Elinor Ostrom, the first woman that got the Nobel Prize for Economics, because she talked about water, air, knowledge, all the commons that we have. Regarding the GDP, I know that there are many researchers on the room, so I invite you to develop new indicators because we need it. The GDP, of course, we can use the GDP. The GDP only measures the amount of money that we use in one specific place, a country usually, to buy and sell stuff during one specific time, usually a year. So we can use it to measure that. What we are not measuring, whether you have a job or not, whether you have a house or not, whether you are enjoying your life and you have time to spend with your family and your friends or not. So we need to develop new indicators. There are many attempts now, so I invite you to do that. And of course, I offer myself to collaborate with you because we are doing that in NESI. We have some papers connected with that. My final message would be connected with this and the narrative. We need a positive narrative. We need a narrative because the current system is not going to disappear or change. We change a government with a new government. So it's a process. So look around yourself. There are many alternative models, and the new economy is going to be the sum of the best proposals of each one of them, of the circular economy, the green economy, the social economy, fair trade, sustainable finances, impact investment. The best proposals of all these models is going to be the new economy, and that is emerging. So the final message also is, don't trust too much to the experts, because look at the world, we are not doing quite good. So trust yourself, be brave enough to do things, be brave enough to make mistakes, be brave enough to trust yourself, be brave enough to love your enemy and respect and have empathy with your enemies, and be brave enough to unleash your potentials.
Thank you very much. On that inspiring note, and before I close the panel, let's see if we manage to change your minds about what you've already voted on. Okay, so there's a 2% drop on the ineffective governance, and there's more on lack of public awareness and exclusion and lack of citizen engagement. So I think that's good, 2% change. Thank you so much for our dear guest speakers, for the insightful comments, and thank you for all of you for being here.